Good evening and welcome to tonight's Undaunted, bringing into the news untold stories. I am Tabitha Akor. Let's begin. Tonight in Ambazonia, the story begins in classrooms where many children are still trying to learn under very difficult conditions. Across several communities, pupils are being forced to study in open spaces, in unfinished or poorly equipped structures, and sometimes in environments that are not safe or suitable for learning. In some areas, there are no proper classrooms, no desks, and limited protection from weather or surrounding bushy environment. For many children, going to school no longer guarantees a proper learning experience. Teachers and parents say this situation is affecting concentration, performance, and overall quality of education in Ambazonia. Now we also turn our attention to one of the most sensitive issues in the ongoing war in Ambazonia: the continued detention of individuals widely known as the Nera. Their case continues to divide opinion, with supporters describing their detention as unjust and linked to political and civil rights struggles, while authorities maintain their position on their national security and legal frameworks. For many in Ambazonia, however, the case remains a symbol of a deeper disagreement over justice, rights, and political expression during the war. Now, from struggling classroom to disputed detentions to rising social challenges, Ambazonia continues to face multiple pressures at once, each one affecting ordinary civilians and each one shaping daily life in different but serious ways. Well, we begin with the prime headlines. Tonight, we take a look at Outrage in Benakuma as education project stalls. Pupils forced to learn in open air month after approved classroom bid. Also tonight, Mamfe rises against drug abuse as residents turn to traditional rituals to cleanse communities. Nera detentions back in spotlight as Ambazonia war enters 9th year. Justice Ministry fought Tchiroma over move to sue Biya in French court, calls its question of confidence in national judiciary. Now over to the details. Approved classroom bid concerns are growing in Benakuma, Mencham division of southern Cameroon, over delays in an approved school infrastructure project as pupils in Moula village continue to study under poor and unsafe conditions. Residents have raised questions over a stalled construction bid for 2 classrooms and an office at a local primary school 6 months after the project was reportedly approved under the Benakuma Council. But then, community members say there has been no visible progress on the site since the approval, sparking public frustration and renewed scrutiny over the use and management of the allocated funds. The situation has left pupils learning in open-air conditions, exposed to harsh weather and surrounded by bushy, unsafe environment. A situation locals describe as unacceptable for effective learning. Parents and community leaders are now questioning whether the funds were disbursed and why the project has not been executed, with some alleging possible administrative delays or lack of accountability within the local council structure. Now we see that the delay has intensified concerns over the state of educational infrastructure from the home front, where schools continue to operate without adequate classrooms, learning materials, or basic facilities. Education stakeholders warn that prolonged exposure to such conditions could further affect the quality of learning and widen educational inequalities for children in Ambazonia. As pressure mounts, residents are calling on the Benakuma Council and relevant authorities to provide clear answers on the status of the project and ensure urgent action is taken to complete the classrooms and improve learning conditions for pupils in Maula village. Now also tonight, let's see what is happening in Mamfe. Authorities in southern Cameroon are taking renewed steps to curb the rising incidents of drug abuse among young people following years of growing public concern and repeated community-led protests over the spread of illicit substances. The latest developments come after a recent security meeting held in Mamfe Manu Division, where regional administrative and security authorities reviewed the security situation and raised alarm over the rising tide of drug trafficking and substance abuse across Ambazonia. Drug-related crimes and increasing consumption among young people featured prominently in the discussions as officials expressed concern over the growing social impact of the trend on users of these drugs. Let's take a look.
English.
Let's take a look.
English. Una yet. Apanya no come up by morning time. He talk say anybody take drug, banga, kayo, ice, any drug where it make a grace. Any drug, anybody take a inside back on land. My parent follow it. My parent follow it. You go for bush. Small seat nagi, it remain. Every day player go show the smoke for inside back up. Every block where show is singing for inside ground. I parent go away. A back up. You don't take it in the morning time. Somebody protect a back up. Any man where there is a land, is a land of backup. Any man man, when you go for bush, say the man get money, but they hold him. Let's find out another person.
In response to mounting pressure, authorities are now reportedly introducing measures aimed at strengthening prevention, enforcement, and community engagement. While details of the interventions vary across localities, officials are increasingly emphasizing a coordinated approach involving security forces, administrative structures, traditional rulers, religious leaders, parents, and youth representatives. The renewed focus reflects growing recognition of the complexity of the crisis, which observers say cannot be addressed through enforcement alone. Community members and analysts continue to point to deeper drivers, including unemployment, limited access to rehabilitation services, peer influence, and the broader impact of the ongoing insecurity in Ambazonia. Previous reports have documented instances of community-led responses, including protests against drug hotspots and local initiatives aimed at discouraging drug consumption. However, concerns persist that such efforts, while visible, may not be sufficient without sustained institutional support. As authorities begin to roll out a new strategy following the Mamfe security deliberations, attention is now shifting to whether these measures will produce long-term results or whether drug abuse will remain a persistent social challenge among young people in southern Cameroon's Ambazonia. Now, let's bring you over to what is making rounds on the internet, a recent debate, and maybe bringing the Nera 10 to spotlight. Debate is intensifying over the continued detention and trial of several figures in Ambazonia as war enters its 9th year with no comprehensive political settlement in sight. The issue remains one of the most sensitive aspects of the long-running war in Ambazonia, where struggle for self-determination continue alongside government-led security responses. Now, at the center of renewed scrutiny is the case of Pa Wilfred Tazang and other individuals commonly referred to as the Nera then, who were arrested in 2018 in Nigeria and later transferred to French Cameroon. Their detention continues to generate legal and political debate with differing interpretations from state authorities, legal observers, and international rights organizations. Ambazonian analysts argue that the circumstances surrounding their arrest and extradition raise unresolved questions about due process, jurisdiction, and adherence to international legal protections. They further point to rulings from Nigerian courts that declared aspects of the transfer inconsistent with legal standards, as well as concerns raised by human rights bodies regarding fair trial procedures, including the use of military tribunals to try civilians. For many within Ambazonia, the case has become symbolic of broader grievances tied to governance, political representation, and the handling of Ambazonians. They argue that continued detention of key figures risks deepening mistrust and complicating efforts toward meaningful dialogue. Now, on the other hand, Cameroonian authorities maintain that the individuals were prosecuted under national security laws linked to the escalation of armed war in southern Cameroon, and they insist that judicial processes are being followed within the country's legal framework. Now we'll see that the broader backdrop remains the unresolved Ambazonian war, now in its ninth year, which has resulted in widespread displacement, disruption of education, and continued insecurity in affected communities. Analysts note that beyond the legal argument, the issue has become deeply political, raising questions about whether a purely security-driven approach can resolve what has evolved into long-standing governance and identity war. As the situation persists, attention continues to focus on whether renewed legal proceedings, international scrutiny, or political engagement will shift the trajectory of the war toward dialogue and long-term resolution. Now, a recent development coming over from what Tchiroma, the claims he made earlier last week. We've got a recent report of what seems to be a response to Tchiroma's move. Questions of confidence in a national judiciary is the recent fresh political and legal debate that has emerged in French Cameroon after the minister delegate to the Minister of Justice and Keeper of the Seals, Jean Didio Momo, criticized opposition figure Issa Tchiroma Bakary for taking legal action against President Paul Biya and other officials in French court. Barrister Momo questioned the decision to bypass Cameroon's local judicial system, arguing that seeking recourse in a foreign court reflects a lack of confidence in national legal institutions. He maintained that such a move raises concerns about the credibility and authority of domestic courts in handling disputes involving state officials. The remarks come in response to recent claims by Issa Tchiroma Bakary, who, speaking from exile in the Gambia, alleged large-scale corruption and financial mismanagement within the Biya administration. He had accused the government of presiding over decades of alleged embezzlement and called for accountability through legal and political channels. In his latest intervention, Tchiroma reportedly pursued action in France, a move that has now drawn strong criticism from government officials who view it as an attempt to internationalize domestic political dispute. Barrister Momo further argued that involving foreign judicial bodies in matters concerning local governance is inappropriate and risks undermining national sovereignty. He likened such actions to return to colonial-era patterns where external institutions were used to adjudicate internal affairs. The development has added a new layer to ongoing tensions between the opposition and government, particularly around issues of governance, accountability, and the legitimacy of institutions. Tchiroma's earlier allegations of massive embezzlement and systemic financial mismanagement had already sparked political reactions and public debate, with supporters describing his claims as a bold exposure of corruption, while critics dismiss them as politically motivated statements issued from exile. Now the latest exchange shifts the conversation from allegations of corruption to questions about legal strategy, institutional trust, and the role of international courts in domestic political dispute. As the debate continues, both sides remain firm in their positions, reflecting a broader political environment marked by deep divisions over accountability, justice, and the credibility of state institutions. Now we'll head over to news coming across the globe. The Democratic Republic of the Congo's Ebola outbreak has intensified, with confirmed infections rising to over 808 and the death toll reaching 192, according to the latest figures released by the country's Ministry of Health. Health officials said 26 new cases and 11 additional deaths were recorded on Sunday, highlighting the continued spread of the virus in the country's eastern region. The outbreak, which was officially declared on May 15, remains concentrated in the provinces of Ituri, North Kivu, and South Kivu, where emergency response operations are ongoing. Authorities said 363 patients were receiving treatment in isolation facilities as health workers continue effort to contain the disease through surveillance, patient management, and community engagement. Since the outbreak began, 48 people have recovered from the virus. Health experts say the current epidemic is being driven by the Bondi-Bugio strain of Ebola, a less common variant that has presented additional challenges for containment efforts. Based on official data, the outbreak has recorded a case fatality rate of 23.8%. The Ministry of Health said it would continue strengthening response measures, including contact tracing, patient isolation, and public awareness campaigns to curb further transmission of the virus. Also tonight, a new development in South Africa. Xenophobia seems to be taking its way. Now, South Africa has acknowledged that persistent accusations of xenophobia are beginning to take an economic toll, with political and local artists losing performance opportunities across Africa and businesses facing growing challenges abroad. Justice and Constitutional Development Minister Mmamoloko Kubaya said the backlash against South Africa has affected entertainers and companies operating in other African countries. Let's take a look. Well, we'll see that the minister rejected suggestions that recent deportations and evacuations involving foreign nationals were driven by xenophobia, maintaining that the actions were aimed at tackling illegal immigration and enforcing existing laws. However, she admitted that South Africa is facing increasing criticism over its handling of migration issues and that the repercussions are becoming more visible. Kubaya said government agencies has intensified engagement with South African businesses operating across the continent and in other parts of the world in response to the growing concerns. She also called on African countries to distinguish between efforts to address illegal migration and the treatment of foreigners who are legally residing in South Africa and also working within their borders. She stressed that migrants with legal status should be protected and treated fairly. The remarks come amid renewed scrutiny of South Africa following reports of xenophobic attacks that have sparked concern over Africa. Countries including Ghana, Nigeria, and Malawi have evacuated some of their citizens from South Africa in response to the tensions. The debate has also extended into the sporting arena. Last week, South Africa captain Ronwen Williams expressed disappointment that many African supporters appeared to back Mexico instead of Bafana during South Africa's opening match of the 2026 FIFA World Cup. South Africa has lost the Group A encounter 2-0 to Mexico, increasing pressure on the team as it seeks qualification for the knockout stages. Williams' comments have fueled broader discussions about whether recurring concerns over xenophobia have strained South Africa's relations with other African nations and influenced perceptions of the country across the continent. Let's head over to news across the globe. Leaders of the group of G7 opened high-level talks in France on Monday, with the war in Ukraine and growing instability in the Middle East dominating the agenda. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky joined the summit as world leaders explored ways to bring an end to Russia's more than 4-year invasion of Ukraine. The discussions came amid a fresh wave of Russian drone and missile strikes in Ukrainian cities that killed at least 11 people. The renewed violence has added urgency to diplomatic efforts aimed at securing a ceasefire and advancing negotiations between Kyiv and Moscow. The summit also follows recent developments in the Middle East after U.S. President Donald Trump announced a breakthrough agreement intended to end the latest confrontation involving Iran, shifting international focus back to the conflict in Ukraine. Trump has indicated that he has held separate discussions with both Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin as part of efforts to revive talks aimed at ending the war. Security concerns in the Middle East are also expected to feature prominently in the discussions, with leaders from Egypt, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates participating in talks on regional stability and initiatives to reopen the strategically important Strait of Hormuz. With conflicts in Europe and the Middle East continuing to threaten global security and economic stability, the summit is emerging as a critical test of international cooperation and diplomatic leadership. Also tonight, hundreds of vessels remained stored in the Strait of Hormuz on Monday, despite an announced agreement between the United States and Iran aimed at extending their fragile ceasefire and reopening one of the world's most critical shipping routes. The apparent disconnect between diplomatic progress and maritime activity raised fresh concerns about the timeline for restoring the flow of oil and natural gas through the strategic waterway. United States President Donald Trump said ships had begun moving under the terms of the agreement, indicating that oil-laden vessels were resuming operations. However, maritime analysts and experts tracking global shipping routes reported that movement through the strait remained limited. The full details of the agreement have not been officially released. Now, according to Pakistani officials, the Memorandum of Understanding, largely brokered by Pakistan, provides for the simultaneous lifting of Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports. The arrangement is also expected to pave the way for 60 days of negotiations on Iran's nuclear program and a possible easing of sanctions imposed on Tehran. Pakistani officials familiar with the discussion said the text of the agreement remains confidential. Iran has indicated that implementation of the deal will only begin after a formal signing ceremony, which Pakistan said it is scheduled to take place in Switzerland on Friday. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz has disrupted international markets, triggering increases in fuel prices and driving up the cost of essential commodities, including food. The Strait of Hormuz serves as a vital artery for global energy supplies, making any disruption to traffic through the passage a matter of international economic concern. And with that, we've come to the end of Undaunted, bringing into the news untold stories. But before we go, a recap of the prime headlines on Undaunted tonight. In tonight's Undaunted, we saw outrage in Benakuma as education project stalls, pupils forced to learn in open-air month after approved classroom bid. Also tonight, we saw Mamfe rises against drug abuse as residents turn to traditional rituals to cleanse communities. Nera 10 detentions back in spotlight as Ambazonian war enters 90th year. Justice Ministry fault Tchiroma over move to sue Biya in French court calls it question of confidence in national judiciary. And on the African scene, South African artists lose jobs across Africa as xenophobia concerns deepen. And in the rest of the news across the globe, we saw G7 leaders confront Ukraine war and Middle East tensions at crucial summit. And that is all on Undaunted tonight, bringing into the news untold stories. On behalf of the entire Undaunted newsroom, we say thank you for joining. We'll leave you with ABC Amba TV images. Good night and God bless you.